Welcome to the Boy from Yesterday podcast. Before today's chapter, I want to just remind everyone to please leave a rating and a review and any questions that you have for me in the ratings or comments sections of Apple Podcasts, iTunes, wherever you're finding the podcast. Your questions and your comments, and certainly your ratings and sharing the podcast is always appreciated so that we can share the story with people all over the world who might appreciate hearing it. And now, Chapter 21, Home is a Time. The morning brought another new day in this new time for Tom, and Laurel began to get used to starting her days holding the secret she knew. Despite her relatively young age, she had still learned lots of things in her lifetime. Some things she could have done without learning, like what it feels like to have your mom die way too early, which was something she learned that just plain sucked. And while it didn't really make up for it, she cherished learning that something rocked in an unusual way. The knowledge that magic, or certain kinds of it anyway, were indeed real, and that she was getting to know it. She thought about all the movies, stories, and TV shows she had seen that had some kind of magic in them, and how everyone, including her, just took it for granted that it was all make-believe and not real. It couldn't be, and yet she knew, like perhaps only a few people in the world might know, that at least a little bit of magic, that related to time travel anyway, was very real. She wondered if it would be her civic duty to tell the authorities, or to tell the physics department at Chesterfield University, that she could probably prove the existence of time travel. But then she put it out of her head. Why should she get involved? She was already feeling a strong sense of obligation about helping Tom, who was not just some kind of object that proved the existence of time travel, but a real person she had grown to... what's the word? She wondered if the word was, indeed, love. Maybe it was. She hadn't really thought of that before either, and yet she also knew on some level that the feeling of shock and wonder at learning what Tom really was, and that he had morphed from astonishment and maybe a little charm or amusement to something much more. When did that happen? At what hour, at what moment had the feelings all gone into, and she really had to ponder this, love? That must be the feeling that she had, the reason why, for her obligation, even determination, to help Tom. She wanted to help Tom get home and save Sam, maybe just because of her compassion for this Sam person, whoever he was. She didn't even know his last name, in that time long ago, but also because she knew it meant so much to Tom. But she would have felt the same way about anything that Tom felt strongly about. She wanted to help him because he wanted it so badly. But it was more than just a good deed for the day. The feeling was making her realize that she was the kind of person who wasn't afraid to work for something, to fight for something, and that she had grown to feel strongly about and to be invested in. She liked that about herself. Maybe that's what her dad meant when he told her to go to Chesterfield and live with Gran, that it would be good for her. As smart as Tom was, especially for someone who hadn't been exposed to any technology past what they had in 1890, Laurel knew she would have to help Tom if he was to get back to his own time and save Sam. The learning curve would be too steep for him to figure it out on his own, at least without years of work and study. He could find his way around the geography of town, but he could never use the resources that Laurel knew about how to find the magic words. It would take research about magic, rumors, history, maybe luck. She worried that the information might not exist, or if it did, it might be at the Library of Congress or someplace that would be hard to get to and even harder to explain to Gran and Clark. What if the old magician had never told anyone anything about the magic words that controlled the ring? What if he had never written them down? What if the ring and the words had some kind of one-way use only clause in it? If the magic of this whole thing was powerful, yet cryptic, enough to get them into this, how were they supposed to get out? She thought a second, all during her morning routine to get showered, dressed, and made up a little for a Saturday, and realized that she was thinking us about this problem. For some reason, she just instinctively felt that they were in this together, and for more than just the fact that fate had landed Tom outside her barn. She even felt guilty about saying that to herself. Her barn, because it used to be his barn. Before she could work it all out silently in her head, she was outside and met Tom, who was looking charming and handsome outside in the morning sun near the barn, chasing dog Sam all around. "We better get going," Laurel said, interrupting Tom's reverie of the timeless pastime of playing with a dog, and wondered who was having the better time, Tom or Sam. After a quick breakfast where Laurel made bacon and eggs quickly in the modern kitchen, they walked to the campus library. The library was impressive. The old architecture was charming in its stone and brickwork, and the number of floors continued up to form a tall tower that was accessible by some grand stone staircase that led to a scenic overlook above the clock that had chimed for many years. Tom explained that the clock tower of the library had been there since the days he knew it as Chesterfield State Teachers College, when it was one of only 4 original buildings of the campus. Laurel laughed at the idea of Chesterfield ever being only 4 buildings when the campus plan always seemed to be expanding, and now there were dozens of buildings that housed many different departments, schools, and dorms. Laurel looked around and saw the buildings beyond the original 4 on the quad, and our hearts sank a little bit, thinking that all those buildings, in all their different styles and built during different times in the university's history, were all physical manifestations that represented all the time that separated Tom's home and hers. As they entered the building, which looked modern only because it had been remodeled so many times, Agnes Murphy was on duty this morning at the main reference desk and greeted them with a rather sarcastic smile of her pursed lips. Despite it being morning, Agnes's hair was in its perfect little mini beehive, and her conservative tweed suit jacket barely covered her expanding tummy. Laurel didn't like Agnes, and it wasn't just because Gran didn't like her either. Laurel wasn't even sure about the original bad blood between Gran and her. It was long before her time. But Laurel was convinced the antipathy was genetic and that she inherited it from Gran. "Well, hello, Laurel," Agnes said in a way that made the innocent greeting drip with sarcasm. "And who have we here?" This is Tom Flannery. He's on a special exchange program from Canada." "Really? Which one? I don't remember us having an exchange program with Canada. What would be the point? We speak the same language." She shrugged, looking at Laurel with a combination of incredulity and disdain. "Or it's about the same language, eh?" she said to Tom, giving a wink and thinking that was much funnier than it actually was. "It's new. Hey, we're in kind of a hurry. I have a paper due. American History, Town Archives. I want to show Tom around with some of the history of the town." "Oh, you'll want the town archives in the East Wing through periodicals. Your grandmother likes to say she curated that, but of course with all the history of Chesterfield, well, you know, that wouldn't be possible for any one person to do. The whole history department was involved in that, and quite a few of us volunteers from the town history committee. We have a lot of history here, Tom. It's really quite fascinating. We go way back. Some of the early settlers were here, and all of this used to be a big Indian burial ground, and it's said to be haunted, which is why the old schoolhouse burned down twice before 1880. Tom forgot himself for a second, impulsively responding to what he knew was a patent untruth. "No, it didn't!" Laurel grabbed the back of his shirt where Agnes couldn't see. "What he means is," Laurel paused, "he means that must have been awful. The fires and disturbing the burial ground. It's atrocious what we did to the Native Americans." "Well, the savages did things to us too, remember," Agnes said, nodding with eyebrows up so high and lips pursed so tight that it made a face that Tom could barely suppress laughing at, as a thin grin crossed his mouth. "Indeed, the savages gave us a scare or two as sure as you live," Tom said, half jokingly but also half seriously, as in his time there was still some fear and suspicion about Native Americans. Let's see what's back in the archive, shall we? Laurel pulled at Tom's hand and started walking that direction. Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. Indeed, Agnes said, noting that Laurel was leading Tom by the hand and cocking one eyebrow at it slightly as she turned to the next person in line for information. And how may I assist you? At the row of computer terminals, most of which were unoccupied at that hour of the morning, Laurel grabbed the chair next to the nearest one and immediately began typing. Tom just stared at all the computer terminals and was fascinated to see some of them with screensavers that had moving designs all over them. Are these all kaleidoscopes? Tom asked. Laurel didn't look up from her screen but kept typing. What? That's what they look like. All these designs rolling around, like a kaleidoscope you look through. I had one as a kid. It was a great toy. When you held it up to the light and turned one end of it, see, it would... I know, I had one too. It was plastic. Now focus here. What are Sam's symptoms like? How was he sick? Laurel said. Tom didn't know what plastic was, but realized it was more important to buckle down and get to work than to have another history lesson in the how modern kaleidoscopes had changed over the years. Tom explained all of Sam's symptoms that he saw during his visit to his house. He described the way he looked tired and hot, how his hair was matted with sweat, how he breathed heavily. Laurel searched WebMD and other medical sites online, and after some false leads started to explain to Tom that Sam apparently had sepsis, or a similar type of infection that could be treated with antibiotics. What are those again? Tom asked, and Laurel had to take a deep breath to quickly explain when her phone, which had been on the desk next to the keyboard, lit up and buzzed. She picked it up to see the text. It was from Emily. Look behind you, LOL. She looked up and Emily and TJ were there, arms full of books, but with TJ carrying some magazines that were clearly not school-related. Hey, Lars, Tom, Emily said. Let me guess, TJ said. Research for Kapoor's paper due Tuesday? Laurel went white for a second, realizing in a panic that she hadn't even started that paper yet, but regained her cool enough to use that, as good as any, as a cover. Yeah, going good. Trust me, child, he wouldn't know the difference if you wrote in hieroglyphics. Don't sweat it, TJ said. What are you doing here? Emily asked, as if Laurel hadn't just said so at TJ's prompting. Laura was teaching me about antibiotics, Tom said, thinking that would be interesting and new to anyone. You're pre-med. Wouldn't you know know a lot about those? Emily asked. She found something new, Tom said. I was looking one up. I heard the FDA put a new block warning on something Gran takes, Laurel said, not really knowing what that was, but remembering something on the TV that Clark had been watching about it. Tom took that as his cue to be quiet, not knowing at all what she was talking about. Ah, well, I hope she's okay, Emily said. Rocket? Late breakfast? I'm helping Tom get oriented to the library. He might be here a lot on this project, Laurel said. Pity, TJ said, giving Tom a look, which Tom just smiled back and giving a little shrug. Well, we'll let you guys get to it, Emily said. They don't need any help from us, TJ said, as he took Emily's arm and walked off as Emily mimed, Call me, over her shoulder to Laurel. Let's try some more about those words, Laurel said, doing a Google search for 19th century magic objects incantations, as Tom sat down beside her and read over her shoulder. They continued like this, Laurel searching and Tom taking notes in his fastidious 19th century handwriting, which was a bit slow for Laurel, but she went at a pretty fast pace, asking Tom various questions to try to narrow down the search. Still, their efforts didn't yield much. Tom looked at Laurel typing away using the kaleidoscope typewriter that lit up in ways that made him think she must be good at using this, and wondered if every girl in the modern day could do that. He could have looked around and seen the other girls using Google as well as Laurel, but he didn't look at them. He looked at Laurel instead, and only her, and that was fine by him. After they compiled some notes, Tom gently took Laurel's hand as it was on the mouse of the computer on the desk. Hey, he said, can I show you something? Laurel nodded and they gathered their things. Okay, but I want to show you something first, she said, and led him through to the East Wing and the town archives, which had glass cases lining the walls with artifacts, and big topography and maps on the walls, too. Tom toured the exhibit with Laurel as his guide, narrating, and he didn't even bother to correct her on the things she got wrong about his time, but silently smiled and found the fairly frequent inaccuracies charming, even if they did level the playing field a bit about his not knowing what a goozle was. He was so used to not knowing about this time he had come to that it was refreshing to hear the feeling that was a bit mutual, because these modern whippersnappers weren't nearly as clever as they would have liked to have thought themselves to be, given all their technology. Then Tom realized that maybe things hadn't changed as much as he thought. He took Laurel's hand. "All right, miss, now it's my chance to take a turn," as he led Laurel toward the main reading room and into the little alcove where the door to the stairs leading up the clock tower were, still intact, just as he knew them. He took her up the considerable number of flights of stairs, him not needing to pause for breath because he had been so physically active in his time, but Laurel occasionally needing to, being a little flushed and winded. They finally reached the top landing, which was a circular lookout point, guided on all sides by a waist-high brick and cement wall, but otherwise open to the fresh air. He led her to a spot looking south, and leaned on the wall as they both took in the view from the tower at the vast horizon beneath a clear sky. Far above any cars or pedestrians, it was quieter up here, except for an occasional bird chirping or distant plane flying overhead. All their time researching had taken longer than they thought, and it was starting to be sunset already, with the lights of campus starting to turn on. "I still can't get used to all these electric lights," Tom said. "In my time we had the moon and some gas lamps, but it was much darker overall. It kind of hurts my eyes sometimes." "What did you have then?" Laurel wondered. "Like him down there. I see a guy on a bicycle. Did you have one of those?" "Yes, I did. My Uncle Nate was pretty fortunate. Well off. Because we sold these things at the store. We got some samples and such for free or from a salesman. I learned to ride one, but they're new. I had one of the safety bicycles like you see now, but I learned on the kind with the big tall wheel." "I've seen those," Laurel said. "My American history book textbook showed those once." "And they were all right amusement," Tom said, "but the kind you have here are safer and easier to balance. But I'll take a horse any day. You know, I came up here one time and took a photograph. I wish I could show you that. So much different then, and you can still tell it's the same town, though," Tom laughed, looking at Laurel's face, whose eyes met his, smiling. "So you had a camera, too?" Laurel said, not really concentrating about cameras as much as she was thinking about how pretty Tom's eyes looked when they reflected the setting sun. "And to think it was all right here. I'm surprised the place hasn't fallen down by now. Wood tends to rot over a long time, you know," Tom said, looking around a bit. "It's been remodeled some. Well, those support beams," Laurel said, also looking around, turning behind her and then turning back, misjudging the space and bumping into Tom, then impulsively looking up at him and kissing him. He kissed her back. They kissed passionately for a moment, the tension that had been building for a while now, released in the safety and the height and the quiet of the clock tower. Tom gently pulled away, a look of surprise on his face. "I can't get used to the ways of you modern ladies," he said. "But I like it." He smiled and kissed her again, this time longer. Laurel pulled away gently but stayed close to him, as the breeze coming up from the setting sun made it cool up there. "So does it feel like home?" she asked. "I reckon a bit, to tell you the honest truth," Tom said, pausing and looking out the horizon from the different angles around him. "I reckon that home isn't just a place. It's a time, too. This place is home, sure. It's Chesterfield and all. But it's not my Chesterfield. It's not my home. I miss it sometimes. Every morning I wake up and I have to pinch myself that I'm not going to see Uncle Nate for breakfast or open up the store, sometimes before sunrise, or see Sam or ride Chestnut. I'm here in this new world, this new place. I reckon you, miss, are the best part of that. I think about what we're trying to do, for me to leave here to go back, and I realize to go back to save Sam, to be home again, that means leaving you here. You weren't even born back then. Your own kin wasn't even born back then. That's true. I don't even know who they were. I know some were here. Gran did all this research on our family on my grandfather's side. Gran's husband, who died just a few years ago. I wish I could ask him. Maybe you knew who some of my family tree were if they were around here. I imagine so, Tom said, and then laughed. I probably sold them some horse feed. They laughed a moment, then the smiles faded from their faces as they both realized what Tom had said a moment ago, that Tom leaving Laurel meant they wouldn't see each other again. Suddenly that felt unthinkable given what just happened, and yet to stay would have eaten at Tom's conscience, like he abandoned Sam, abandoned his own life, his own time. Both of them knew this. Both of them knew they had to press on and find a way to make the magic ring work again, to reverse the trip. Yet the thought of Tom leaving made Laurel's heart sink. Tom looked out at the horizon and again saw the rising moon, large and beautiful in the sky. He smiled as he looked at it and pulled Laurel closer with his arm around her, in part to keep her warm and in part to reassure himself that, at least for the moment, she was there with him, could feel her, could squeeze her a bit closer to his chest. You see that moon? Tom said, smiling. Yeah, Laurel said, taking in its clear beauty. When I have to go, if I go, I want you to think of me when you see that moon. Any time you see that moon ever after, think of me. That moon is timeless, and every time I see it, back home in my time, if I ever get back there, I'll think of you. You've got a deal, mister, Laurel said, her voice choking up as she said so. So she just shut up and kissed him again. This time was longer, for not only did they have the height and the quiet of being in the clock tower, now it was darker, too. The breeze blew colder and seemed to shake them out of the moment. Laurel pulled away with a frown, thinking, there's some stuff I gotta do. Tonight, later, and something else soon. We better get back. Gran probably has dinner for us. But I want to make one more stop along the way, Laurel said. They looked at each other silently, tenderly, for one more moment. Where is that? Tom asked, smiling a coy, curious smile. I think I have an idea, Laurel said, where we can get some answers, even if we don't really know the questions yet, and even if we don't want to know them yet. She smiled and shrugged a little. Then, as if awakened, she took Tom's hand and they hurried down all the stairs and out of the university grounds and jogged down the side street that led to the big grounds of Chesterfield Memorial Park, the town's cemetery.